grade 10, and one of the teachers pulled
Nice,
me
nice.
aside and they asked me to help them with Black History Month. And I'm like, wow, I'm 15. I know a few things that my mother has taught me, but you're the educators. You should be teaching me about Black history, even colonialism. I could count one page in our history book that actually mentioned colonialism, and it was very like colored over. It was very romanticized. It was not accurate at all. So I definitely think that the educational institution, especially in high schools and middle schools, they should teach all kids about Indigenous and Black history in Canada. Um, I think more so when I moved to post secondary school, I did have those tools um, given to me. I learned about colonialism and the Indigenous struggle within the Canadian narrative, and I learned about about Black history, especially like Africville. If anybody has heard of Africville, I certainly did not. It wasn't even in my textbook in high school. So that is very sad to note, but it's something that I think should be brought up and should be implemented in high schools and middle schools. So that's my opinion.
Thank you. I agree with you, Tara. I actually do teach a Black Canadian Studies course at Seneca. So if you want to come back, you're more than welcome. I'm just kidding. If you
Definitely, I will.
or Chaz and Karina, the invitation is open to you as well. I'm kidding. One thing that I noticed is that all of your responses focused in the classroom, and I'm wondering if I were to piggyback up on that same question, can you think of any supports that would have been helpful in enhancing your educational experiences outside of the classroom also? Right? Because I think when we talk about supports and schooling, it goes back to even my question and answer with Charmaine. Schooling is the totality. It's just not the classroom. So I don't know if you can answer any of you can answer that. Tara, go ahead.
So, growing up in Vaughan, well, actually, I went to middle school in Toronto and I went to high school in Vaughan. So I can say, in terms of community education or involvement, it's totally different. There are more resources for Black youth in Toronto. I mean, it could be better, but it definitely compared to Vaughan, and there are like a lot of Black youth in Vaughan or even minorities in Vaughan. There were no resources given to us in high school. There was no programs that we could all connect and share our stories, which would be amazing, or even just support each other. There's no programs. You just kind of had to navigate um teen life as a Black youth in a predominantly white neighborhood alone. So I definitely think that in other cities they should also have programs, or more accessible, I should say. Maybe they have programs, but more accessible programs to Black and or BIPOC youth in those cities. So that's my experience. In Toronto, I was a part of a program. I cannot remember it, but I was pretty young. But they were amazing. They would teach us different things, like even things like drumming, like African drums. You had classes about African drumming, which was amazing. They taught us a lot about Black history, even though we didn't learn it in the classroom. In this program, I was able to learn about Black inventors and scientists and a little more than I was getting from the classroom. Also, like the sense of community that I had connecting with other Black individuals, people who were like me, who had like a very colorful background, was amazing. Um, because I'm half Jamaican and half Kenyan, so sometimes I couldn't really find a lot of Kenyan or East African people I could connect with. But within that program, there was all people of walks of life that I could communicate and voice my stories and individual struggles to, and they'd actually have something similar to which could help guide me through the or navigate my issues. So I do feel that there is a huge discrepancy between programs in other cities versus Toronto, and the accessibility to them. So that's my opinion.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's very good insights. Chaz, anything that you would add in regards to supports outside of the classroom that would have been helpful in enhancing your experience?
Um, Not that I can think of. If yeah, not that I can think of right now.
Okay, not a problem. Thank you. So let's move to another question. What were your unique experiences as a Black student in post-secondary? Karina, can we start?
Okay, yeah, sure. So, I have a bit more to share here because I was here for post-secondary school. So majority, well, I went to Humber and Seneca. So I was one of the few Black people in my class. Majority was Indian, and I felt like, okay, I was a little bit lost. Nothing was, well, I didn't see faces or familiar faces, as to mine. And I feel like, I was lost. There was nothing that was supporting Black people like myself, like support, like, for example, maybe like a club or anything that is directing to us as Black people or as international students, for example. How do we cope, or how are we coping as students here in a new country, right? Where you have so many diverse, cultures here. It was a bit new for me, like a culture shock. Um, and so it would have been helpful for me as someone who's coming from the Caribbean. You mentioned, Charmaine, about code switching. I never heard of that in my entire life. I was doing it, but I wasn't aware of it because in Jamaica we have our own language that we speak. But when we go into the classes, we have to switch so that people can understand what we're saying. Even if I speak English, I have to kind of put some accent on it so that people will understand what I'm really saying. You know what I mean? And so it has been a challenge for me as a Black person, where I can't find a lot of Jamaicans or Black people where I can, kind of, oh, hey, let's hang out. It has been a challenge for me because I didn't have much friends in my class. And so it was just the Indians together, the Asians together, or whoever. I didn't have that in my as my experience here in Seneca. As a Black student. So that was a challenge for me.
Thank you. And do you think that was based on your program of study or Seneca in general?
It could be Seneca in general, because I don't think it had anything to do with, because I did events, and event has a lot to do with festivals, so it's not necessarily geared towards a certain culture, but it could just be Seneca. I don't know. Or again, maybe a lot of people don't know about marketing as a career. They're always going towards maybe IT or something that is a popular career. So I don't know.
Thank you. No, thank you. I like your honesty about talking about code switching and things of that nature. And I think, again, it goes back to a question that, Charmaine even asked myself about authenticity, right? And one piece of advice that I would give all of you also is that, and I used to, I still code switch. I think we all code switch. And not only in regards to language, but also for me, I used to, change the way that I speak all the time. And even when I'm in the classroom, and I tell my classes that I hear my Black dialect, I hear my American accent, and I make no excuses for it.
Mm-hmm.
It's who I am now, right? When I was at your ages, I would make sure that I enunciated correctly and properly and things of that nature. But that took a lot of
takes a lot of work,
emotional labor, right?
Yes.
And your authentic selves. And so now it's just who I am is what you get. And if you don't like it, or if you can't understand what I'm saying, that's too bad. I'm making no excuses for it. So sorry that I jumped in there.
No problem. A perfect example. I have one of my classmates, he's from Colombia, and he knows I'm Jamaican. And he would be like, so if I'm not putting the accent, the Canadian accent on how I speak. And he was like, no, 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 I don't understand. Go back to speaking, like Canadian. I don't understand when you're speaking like regular English. I'm like, but I'm still speaking English, like, so stuff like that. I have to make sure that how I speak, they can understand, even though I'm still speaking English. You know what I mean? So.
Okay, thank you. Tara, what about you? Any unique experiences as a Black student in Missouri?
Definitely. I think something very similar to Karina. Navigating the classroom as a Black person was definitely a lot easier in post-secondary school, but it still wasn't easy. I mean, I was still code switch. I was still trying to, separate my culture and my education. So, people would think that I'm a very serious student, or they wouldn't make assumptions about me based on my background as like a Black second generation immigrant woman. I I would say that I was going to speak more about what you were talking about earlier, Clayton, like the pressures of pursuing one type of career versus, kind of um, branching yourself off and opening yourself to different options. So I definitely went through that in my first year of secondary school. I actually got in for biology, which is completely different to where I am now. So I pressured myself a lot, like, what, you're gonna become a doctor, you're in school for biology. And by the end of my first year, I was like, I hate it. I don't want to do it anymore. So actually, one of my professors that I had for an elective in my Women and Gender Studies course, she said, you seem like very passionate when you talk in class. Why don't you, come join our program or try it out? I was like, a minor. And I said, okay. And I fell in love with it and it became my major. So I definitely think that a lot of us, like even Karina was saying, like the pressures of becoming like a doctor or a lawyer, or, careers that are considered, you know, um, prestigious, although, all careers are prestigious if you're passionate about it. I think definitely we should stop putting limits on ourselves, or stop allowing people to pressure our choices in careers, and just, open ourselves up to more opportunities, especially like when when you're 18, you have more freedom to allow yourself to learn and grow into, someone you've always wanted to be, or someone that you didn't expect to be. So that's something that I went through, and I'm actually really happy that I did, because if I continued biology, I'd probably be miserable at this point. So that's something I went through for sure. And in terms of the classroom, I want to talk about like the educators themselves. So in my Women and Gender Studies course, we do learn a lot about anti-Black racism and theories such as intersectional theory, where we talk about the impacts of people with multiple identities, meaning, for example, I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm a second generational immigrant, and so on. Um, Most of my classes were taught by white women or white men. And, it's kind of when you're learning about, anti Black racism from a white person who still doesn't necessarily have the insights that a Black individual would, because of, the everyday implications or everyday struggles that goes into navigating like just life as a Black person, is not necessarily clear to someone of a different race or different culture. So having someone teach me something I go through every day who doesn't go through it was kind of like, it was kind of like an inner conflict. Like, okay, it's a theory that I'm learning about, but do you necessarily have any insight to the theory? So that was kind of intimidating, that the fact that anti-Black racism is something that affects Black people, but it wasn't taught in the academic sphere, it wasn't taught by Black people. Where I went to university